Hello, my name is Rose Carter, and I still don't understand what really happened that morning at the airport. Maybe it was a glitch, maybe it was something else, but I can't stop thinking about it. It started like any other business trip. A 9 a.m. flight from Seattle to Los Angeles, flight 602. I arrived early, coffee in hand, half asleep and scrolling through emails while waiting in line for check-in. Nothing unusual. The terminal was buzzing with the same tired energy airports always have. Families juggling strollers, people arguing quietly over baggage weight, and the low hum of boarding calls echoing through the hall. When it was finally my turn, the airline agent smiled politely and asked for my ID. She typed in my booking number and frowned at her screen. Her smile faltered just slightly, the kind of flicker you might miss if you weren't paying attention. She muttered. That's odd. I raised an eyebrow. She turned the screen toward me, showing my boarding pass preview. It's assigning you seat 32B, she said. But this aircraft only has 31 rows. I laughed softly, thinking she was joking. That's strange, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. She nodded, clearly uneasy now. It must be a system error. We've been having some database issues this week. Don't worry, I'll fix it manually. She clicked through a few screens, reissued my boarding pass, and handed it to me. You're now in 14 amperes, she said with a forced smile. All good. I thanked her and turned to leave, but she stopped me. Just curious, when you booked your ticket, did you choose your seat yourself? I shook my head. No, it was auto-assigned. She hesitated again, then shrugged it off. Okay, well, enjoy your flight, Miss Carter. The way she said my name stuck with me. I remember thinking her tone sounded almost cautious, like she was making sure she'd pronounced it correctly for some reason. Security was routine. I got a text from my boss reminding me about the client presentation later that day. Everything felt normal again, but the weird checking glitch lingered in the back of my mind. I told myself not to overthink it. Technology messes up all the time. Airlines switch aircraft models. It happens. At the gate, I noticed the same check-in agent talking quietly with another staff member. They were glancing at their monitor, then at the boarding area, like they were looking for someone, maybe me. When our eyes met, they both turned away. That small detail shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Something about it made me uneasy. When boarding was announced, I scanned my pass and stepped onto the jet bridge. The smell of jet fuel and recycled air hit me instantly, oddly comforting. Inside, the cabin was calm. The flight attendants greeted passengers with tired smiles, the kind that come from doing the same thing 1,000 times a week. I found my seat, 14 amperes, window side, and stowed my bag. The row behind me was empty. Across the aisle, a man in a suit was already asleep before takeoff. I glanced around. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Still, as the doors closed and we taxied out, I couldn't shake that moment at check-in. I pulled out my phone to check the aircraft layout on the airline's website. Sure enough, there were only 31 rows. Yet my system-generated email from the night before clearly showed seat 32B. I stared at it for a minute, zooming in, making sure I wasn't imagining it. It was right there, printed and time-stamped, seat 32B. Everything all right, ma'am? The voice startled me. It was a flight attendant, a young woman with kind eyes and a calm presence. Her name tag read Marisol. Oh yeah, I said quickly, lowering my phone. Just double-checking my boarding pass. She smiled politely. First time flying with us? No, I've flown this route before, I said. But I had a weird seat number assigned earlier. Something about a row that doesn't exist. Her smile froze for just a second. A non-existent row? She repeated. Yeah, 32B. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the back of the cabin before she looked back at me. That's strange, she said softly. This plane only goes up to row 31. Must have been a data error. I nodded, pretending to believe her explanation, but I could tell she was unsettled. She excused herself to help another passenger, and I caught her glancing back toward the rear again. Takeoff came quickly. The engines roared, the cabin tilted, and my stomach dropped the way it always does during ascent. Once we leveled off, I tried to focus on my presentation slides, but my mind kept circling back to that number, 32B. About an hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign turned off. I got up to stretch and walked toward the restroom at the back. As I moved down the aisle, I noticed something odd. The row numbers were lit faintly along the overhead bins: 28, 29, 30, 31, and then for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw 32. Just a flicker, a shadowed number that shouldn't have been there. I stopped. The cabin lights flickered once, barely noticeable, and when I blinked, the 32 was gone. The numbers ended cleanly at 31 again. A flight attendant coming from the galley smiled at me as she passed. Oblivious. I forced the smile back and continued to the restroom. Inside, I splashed water on my face and looked at my reflection. I told myself I was just tired, maybe anxious. I hadn't slept well the night before, and sometimes fatigue plays tricks on you. But when I came back to my seat, the air around 14 amperes felt colder. The man in the suit across the aisle was still sleeping, but now his head was turned toward me, his lips slightly parted. For a moment, I could swear he was whispering something. My name, maybe. I put in my earbuds, turned up the volume, and tried to focus on music instead. Later, as the crew started serving drinks, I saw Marisol again. She paused beside my row, leaning slightly closer. "Everything okay, Miss Carter?" She asked, her voice calm, but lower than before. "Yeah," I said, though my voice sounded unsure even to me. "Why?" She hesitated. "I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable. I heard about the check-in issue." "You did?" "Yes," she said, her eyes flicking toward the rear again. "It happens sometimes. A system pulls data from old flight manifests. Nothing to worry about." But the way she said it made it sound like there was something to worry about. When she walked away, I followed her glance to the back of the cabin again. The curtain separating the economy from the galley was slightly open, and behind it, just for an instant, I thought I saw a silhouette sitting in an empty row. Row 32. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart thudded hard against my ribs. I told myself it was the play of light, my imagination, fatigue, anything but what it looked like. Because what it looked like was someone sitting where no one should be. And when I looked down at my phone again, my boarding pass app had refreshed on its own. The seat number at the top now reads 32B. The plane had been in the air for a little over 2 hours when things started to feel wrong. The air was too still. The hum of the engine seemed lower than before, almost like the plane itself was holding its breath. I tried to distract myself with a movie, but every so often I found my eyes drifting toward the back of the cabin. That curtain by the galley hadn't moved in a while, but I couldn't shake the memory of that faint silhouette I'd seen earlier. Marisol and another flight attendant, a tall man named Josh, were doing a quiet head count. I didn't think much of it at first. It looked routine. But when Marisol reached the last row, she froze. Her pen stopped mid-tick on her clipboard. She looked up, frowning, her gaze locked on something behind the curtain. Josh followed her eyes, and his expression changed too, like he was seeing something that didn't make sense. I craned my neck slightly, pretending to stretch so I could see what they were looking at. The curtain shifted just a little, and through the narrow gap I saw it again, a person sitting upright, perfectly still. They were in row 32B. The problem was, there was no row 32. I had counted. Everyone had. Marisol walked toward the galley slowly, like she didn't want to startle whoever was there. She pulled the curtain aside. For a few seconds, she just stood there. Then she turned to Josh and said something in a low, tense voice I couldn't hear. Josh went pale. He nodded and hurried to the front of the cabin. Marisol lingered, then carefully let the curtain fall closed again. A few passengers were starting to notice the shift in atmosphere. The couple across the aisle from me exchanged uneasy looks. A man a few rows back pressed the call button, but no one came. The tension was thick enough to taste. Marisol walked up the aisle with forced calm. Her eyes passed over each passenger, stopping on me for half a second longer than the rest. I knew she recognized me, the girl from check-in, the one who'd been assigned a seat that didn't exist. She offered a quick, polite smile and kept walking, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. When she disappeared into the galley again, curiosity got the better of me. I stood up, pretending to stretch. My legs were shaky. I walked down the aisle slowly, pretending I was heading to the restroom again. Halfway there, I stopped. Through the gap in the curtain, I could see the edge of a headrest, except there shouldn't have been one. The plane's last row ended right before that space, but I could clearly see the outline of another seat, faint and half-shadowed, like it was barely real, and someone was sitting in it. It was a woman. Her hair was dark, shoulder length, and perfectly still, as if not a single strand moved with the plane's vibrations. I couldn't see her face, only the side of her head. She was looking down, her hands folded neatly in her lap. There was something faintly metallic about her. Her presence felt cold, heavy. Then, as if sensing me, her head turned, just slightly, enough for me to see the side of her cheek. It wasn't pale, it was grayish, like a photograph that had been drained of life. I stumbled back, bumping into another passenger. The man mumbled something, but I didn't hear him. My eyes were glued to that gap. But now, when I looked again, the seat was empty. Marisol appeared out of nowhere. She placed a hand on my shoulder gently but firmly. "You should return to your seat, Miss Carter," she said softly. I looked at her, searching her face for some hint of what I'd just seen. "Who was that?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Her expression stayed neutral, almost rehearsed. "It's best if you sit down, please." I wanted to protest, but something in her voice told me not to push it. I nodded and returned to my seat, my pulse hammering in my throat. The rest of the cabin seemed oblivious. A baby cried somewhere near the front. A few passengers laughed softly at their screens. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, except for the fact that my skin crawled like I was being watched. About 20 minutes later, the in-flight entertainment system flickered. The screens went black, then flashed blue, showing the flight map. Only this time, instead of displaying the plane's position over the Pacific, the system glitched, showing rows of passenger seat numbers instead. For a moment, everyone thought it was just a technical hiccup. But then, on every screen, a small white box appeared in the corner that said, "Passenger, Rose Carter, Seat 14 Ampere. Passenger, Rose Carter, Seat 32B. The cabin fell silent. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Passengers began murmuring. One of them even laughed nervously, assuming it was a prank or system bug. But when I looked down the aisle again, I saw Marisol standing completely still, staring at one of the screens with a face that had lost all color. Then she looked at me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Before I could react, the lights flickered again, and for the briefest second, I saw her reflection in the window next to me. Only behind her stood the same woman from the back of the plane, seated calmly in 32B, her eyes open and fixed straight ahead. When the lights steadied, she was gone again. The rest of the flight passed in uneasy silence. No one said a word about the double listing. The crew moved quietly, speaking only in low tones. I kept glancing at the back, half afraid, half compelled. And though I didn't see her again, every time I closed my eyes, I could still smell faint perfume in the cabin air, something floral and old-fashioned. It lingered through landing, through taxi, even as I stepped off the plane. It wasn't until I was standing in the terminal that I noticed the back of my boarding pass. It wasn't the one the agent had given me at check-in. It was the old one, the one marked Seat 32B. By the time Flight 602 reached cruising altitude over the Pacific, I was trying hard to convince myself that everything I'd seen so far had a rational explanation. Glitches happen. Computer systems mix up data. Maybe my eyes played tricks on me in that dim cabin light. Maybe I was just tired. But then the plane's lights flickered again, just once, subtle enough that most people probably didn't notice. I did. Everyone's seat screens blinked, then froze on the flight tracker. The familiar image of a tiny airplane crawling over blue ocean turned to static for a split second, and then something else appeared. A list. It was a digital passenger manifest, names scrolling slowly from top to bottom. I saw my name, Rose Carter, and my seat, 14 amperes. Then, a few lines below, it appeared again, Rose Carter, seat 32B. I froze. My throat went dry. The air felt heavier, thicker. The same faint perfume from before drifted past me again. Just for a second, lavender, with something colder underneath it. The man across the aisle was awake now, looking around. "Hey," he said to no one in particular, "what's with the screens?" A few passengers murmured similar things, but before anyone could react, the displays went dark again. I turned to look at Marisol, but she was gone. The nearest attendant, Josh, was standing in the galley doorway, staring at a tablet in his hand. His expression was tense. I could tell he'd seen it too. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was a text, but the screen showed no service. Still, a notification popped up from my airline's app. Boarding update, passenger Rose Carter checked in for flight 602, seat 32B. The timestamp read now. My stomach dropped. I looked around, half expecting someone to stand up to say it was a system issue, but the silence stretched on. Even the hum of the engines felt quieter, like the plane itself was holding still. That's when I heard it. Soft at first, like someone whispering my name. It came from behind me, low and steady. Rose. I turned around quickly, heart pounding. The rows behind me were empty, except for a sleeping teenager and an older woman flipping through a magazine. I swallowed hard and faced forward again. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Closer this time. Rose. I looked to my left, toward the window. My reflection stared back, pale and uneasy. For a brief moment, I thought I saw another reflection behind mine, fainter, over my shoulder. A woman's outline. I jerked away from the glass, heart hammering. Then the seatbelt sign chimed on, startling me. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm but slightly strained. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a patch of turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your belts. I looked around. People were buckling up, murmuring. Everything looked normal again, but I could feel it. That charge in the air, that crawling sensation under my skin. The kind you get right before a lightning strike. The turbulence started mild, a few bumps and rattles, but soon grew stronger. The cabin shuddered. Cups rattled on tray tables. Overhead bins creaked. I gripped the armrest tightly, staring at the seat back in front of me. Then, just as the plane hit a heavy jolt, I felt something else. A tug on my seatbelt. It wasn't the plane's movement, it was deliberate. The belt tightened across my lap, then loosened slightly, as if someone invisible had just pulled it. I gasped, looking around. Everyone else seemed tense, but unaware. My hands were shaking. I turned to press the attendant call button, but before I could, the lights cut out completely. For 5 seconds, the cabin was plunged into pitch black. That's when I heard the whisper again, clearer this time, right beside my ear. You took my seat. The lights flickered back on. I turned instantly, but there was no one there. The aisle was empty. Josh was moving toward the cockpit, his face pale. Marisol came up behind him, her voice low. "It's happening again," she whispered, not realizing her mic was still active. Her words echoed faintly through the cabin speakers. A few passengers looked up, confused. "What's happening again?" someone asked, but no one answered. The turbulence calmed, almost too suddenly. The seatbelt sign went off again. Everyone exhaled, relieved. Everyone except me. I looked down and froze. My seatbelt had come unbuckled, completely. I hadn't touched it. Before I could move, I noticed something else. A thin line of condensation was forming on the seat next to mine, as if someone invisible had just sat there. The air temperature dropped a few degrees. I could see my breath when I exhaled. Then, from the back of the cabin, a faint metallic sound, like a buckle clicking shut, one sharp click. Everyone else was calm again, settling back into movies and conversations, but I couldn't look away from the aisle. The faint smell of lavender drifted forward again. And then, over the intercom, a distorted female voice, barely audible but definitely there, said one word before the sound cut off. "Carter." Passengers glanced around, confused. The captain's voice came on moments later, apologizing for a minor audio interference. I didn't believe that for a second. For the next hour, I sat completely still, afraid to even breathe. The name on the manifest, the whispers, the tightening seatbelt, the voice, every piece of it felt like a message. But from who? When I finally gathered the courage to look back one last time, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Row 31 ended normally, but behind it, where the cabin wall should have been, I saw a faint shimmer in the dim cabin light, like heat waves. And just for a moment, I could make out the outline of a seat. Someone was sitting in it. They were facing forward, and though the details were blurry, I could see just enough to know one thing. She looked exactly like me. Marisol's face looked different after the turbulence stopped. The professional calm was gone. She kept glancing at the cabin's rear section, then at me, as if weighing whether to say something. The passengers had settled again. Most of them, anyway. But there was a strange heaviness in the air, like everyone could feel that something about the flight wasn't right. The lights dimmed for the evening cycle, and the cabin took on that sleepy hush that comes after meal service. That's when Marisol knelt beside my seat, pretending to check the seat pocket. She spoke quietly, barely moving her lips. "Miss Carter," she said, "have you been hearing anything unusual or seen anything odd?" I hesitated. "Yes," I whispered. "I saw someone sitting in a seat that doesn't exist. I heard someone say my name, twice." Her expression didn't change, but her hands tightened on the edge of the tray table. "Please don't panic," she said softly. "But you should know this isn't the first time." I froze. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the cockpit to make sure no one was listening. Years ago, this same aircraft, different crew, was involved in a serious incident. A passenger went missing mid-flight. No sign of struggle, no open doors, no explanation. Her name was Rose Carter. I stared at her. "That's not possible." She nodded once, her eyes tired, haunted. "It was before my time, but I've heard the stories. Maintenance crews said she vanished somewhere between Tokyo and Los Angeles. They found her boarding pass tucked into the seat pocket of row 32. "There is no row 32, I said automatically. "I know," she replied. "There never was." I felt my skin go cold. The hum of the engine suddenly sounded far away, like the plane was flying through water instead of air. I tried to piece together what she was telling me, but it didn't fit. "So what happened after that?" I asked. "The airline quietly retired the plane for a few years," she said. "They changed its tail number, updated the interior, and tried to move past it. Then last month, the system glitched again. A passenger, assigned seat 32B. Same as before, same name." "You're saying I was assigned the same seat as someone who disappeared on this plane?" She looked down. "It wasn't supposed to happen again, but the database, it keeps pulling that name, that seat number, even after they deleted it." I felt my throat tighten. "You're saying it's haunted?" Marisol didn't answer right away. "I don't believe in ghosts," she said finally, "but I've been flying long enough to know that some planes remember what we try to forget." She stood up before I could respond, straightening her uniform. "Please, Miss Carter, try to stay calm. We'll be landing in a few hours." But her eyes told me something else. She was scared. I sat there for a long time, staring at the headrest in front of me. My mind kept circling back to what she'd said. Another Rose Carter vanished mid-flight, leaving her boarding pass in row 32. I needed proof, something to confirm this wasn't a story meant to pacify a nervous passenger. I opened my phone, switched off airplane mode, and scrolled through my downloads. I'd taken a screenshot of the boarding pass earlier, seat 32B, time-stamped, confirmed. I zoomed in on the digital stamp at the bottom, aircraft N472L. The same tail number Marisol had mentioned, the one supposedly retired. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the cabin lights flickered again, only this time it wasn't random. The lights pulsed, once, twice, and then steadied. The in-flight announcement system crackled to life. A woman's voice, soft, calm, but definitely not the captain's, came through. "Good evening, passengers. This is your captain speaking. We'd like to welcome you aboard Flight 602, non-stop service to Los Angeles. We'll be cruising at 32,000 feet. My blood ran cold. That was the old pre-recorded greeting, the one the airline stopped using years ago. I knew because I'd heard it before, on an archival clip once, in a video about discontinued aircraft. I looked toward the galley. Marisol was frozen, staring at the speaker above her head. The voice continued, cheerful and composed, like nothing was wrong. But halfway through, it glitched. The sound warped, and the pitch dropped into static before ending abruptly. Passengers were starting to stir, uneasy now. A baby started crying. Someone hit the attendant call button. Marisol picked up the intercom handset and said something quietly to the cockpit. Josh hurried out a moment later, his expression tight. "We're fine," he said to the nearest passengers. "Just a minor systems issue. Please remain seated." But when he walked past me, I caught a glimpse of his hand, shaking. Minutes crawled by. The cabin slowly quieted again. I leaned toward the window, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but then I saw it, a faint reflection in the glass beside me. Not Mina. It was a woman sitting in the reflection of the empty seat next to me, her face blurred by the dim light. Her hair was dark, her posture identical to mine. I turned quickly, but no one was there. But on the seat, something had changed. The seatbelt that had been neatly crossed before was now buckled. Tight. I pressed the call button. My voice came out barely steady when Marisol appeared. "She's here," I whispered. Her eyes widened. "Who?" I swallowed hard. "The other Rose." Marisol didn't speak for a few seconds. She looked down the aisle again toward the back of the plane. Then she whispered, "We shouldn't say her name." "Why?" "Because the last time someone did," she said softly, "the lights went out, and when they came back on, they were gone." I stared at her, speechless. She took a slow breath. That woman, they never found her body, but her boarding data stayed in the system, the digital record, the seat number, everything. Even when the aircraft was decommissioned, her file kept reappearing. The perfume returned, faint but unmistakable. Lavender. I looked down at my phone. The boarding pass on my screen flickered once more. The name line blinked, switching back and forth. Rose Carter, 14 Ampere. Rose Carter, 32p. Then it went dark. Marisol's radio crackled quietly. A voice, Josh's, came through. "She's on the manifest again," he said. Marisol's hand trembled. That was the moment I realized whatever this was, it wasn't over. The plane wasn't haunted by a ghost in the way people imagine. It was haunted by a record, a digital echo that refused to die, dragging my name into its loop. And somewhere in that endless data, the first Rose Carter was still waiting, stuck between rows that don't exist, in a seat the system refuses to delete. The plane hit turbulence again, just as the cabin lights dimmed for landing prep. It wasn't the normal kind of turbulence, the short, stomach-dropping bumps that jolt you awake. This was slower, deeper. The kind that rolls through the metal like a low growl. You could feel it in your bones. I was gripping the armrest so tightly my knuckles ached. Around me, passengers looked up from their screens, nervous but calm. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but with a thin edge of strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're experiencing some unexpected headwinds." The plane shuddered again, harder this time. The lights flickered. I felt that pressure, the eerie silence that happens right before something goes wrong. And then I smelled it. Lavender, stronger than ever. I turned to the seat beside me, empty. But the seatbelt was buckled tight, as if someone invisible sat there. The metal buckle gleamed faintly in the cabin light. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Marisol appeared a few rows away, bracing herself against the aisle seats as she tried to steady her footing. Her eyes met mine. I could see fear in them now, real fear. She mouthed something. "Don't move." The turbulence worsened. The cabin rattled. The overhead bins trembled as oxygen masks swayed slightly on their hooks. A child began crying somewhere behind me. I tried to do what she said, but then my seatbelt, my actual seatbelt, snapped open. It didn't slide loose, it snapped. The buckle flew forward and hit the seat in front of me with a sharp click. I gasped and reached down to grab it, fumbling to fasten it again, but it wouldn't lock. The clasp wouldn't connect. I pressed it again and again, shaking. Then I heard the whisper right by my ear. "You took my seat." The voice was identical to mine. Calm, flat, empty. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear the engines anymore. The plane pitched slightly, and everything seemed to blur for a moment. The air felt heavy, the lights pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Marisol was moving toward me now, her face pale in the flickering cabin glow. She reached my row, crouched, and shouted over the rumble. "Rose, listen to me. Stay with me." "I can't buckle." "It's okay," she said quickly, gripping my hand. "Just breathe. It's not you she wants. It's the seat." "What does that mean?" She didn't get a chance to answer. The lights went out completely. For a full 10 seconds, there was only darkness and the roar of the wind. Then silence. Everything stopped. The engines, the rattling, even the faint vibration that runs through every plane mid-flight. It was like we'd been cut loose from the world. I couldn't see a thing. Then, faintly, the glow from the aisle lights came back on, just enough to see shapes. Row after row of passengers sat frozen, faces pale in the dim light. Their eyes were wide, unfocused, as if they were listening to something I couldn't hear. Then I felt it, a soft pressure on my left arm, a hand, cold, firm, and wrong. I turned my head slowly. The woman was sitting in the seat beside me now. The same dark hair, the same posture. Her skin was gray, eyes empty. She looked like a washed-out photograph. Her face was my face, but lifeless, drained of color. She leaned closer. The air around her shimmered faintly, like heat distortion. Her lips moved. "You shouldn't have taken my seat," she whispered again. The next moment, the plane lurched downward, hard. People screamed. The cabin lights flared white, blinding for a second. I felt Marisol's grip slip from my hand as my body jerked forward. Then everything went black. When I came to, there was sunlight. We were on the ground. Passengers were dazed, whispering to one another. The captain's voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles." It took me a second to realize what had just happened. The descent had felt like falling, but somehow we'd landed safely. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking on everyone. People were shaken but unharmed. Marisol wasn't among them. I unbuckled, stood, and looked around. Every row was full, calm, alive. I half expected to see her coming from the galley. Instead, Josh appeared and told everyone to remain seated until the doors opened. His face looked blank, almost robotic. "Where's Marisol?" I asked. He blinked, confused. "Who?" "The attendant. Short hair, dark eyes. She was sitting near me before we landed." He frowned. "Ma'am, there's no Marisol on this crew." I felt my stomach twist. "What? That's not possible. She talked to me. But he had already turned away to help an elderly man with his bag. When the doors opened, sunlight spilled into the cabin. People began to file out, chatting softly, grateful to be on the ground. I grabbed my bag and followed, too stunned to speak. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed something that made me stop cold. Behind row 31, where the cabin wall should have been, a folded boarding pass sat neatly tucked into the seam of the last seat. The paper was slightly yellowed, and the ink had faded. I reached for it. It read, passenger name, Rose Carter. Seat 32. B, flight 602, Tokyo to Los Angeles. Date, the 12th of March, 2014, 10 years ago. I stood there frozen. Josh called from the front, telling passengers to keep moving. I slipped the pass into my pocket and stepped off the plane. In the terminal, everything was bright, loud, alive again. I kept walking, numb, until I reached a quiet corner near the windows. I pulled out my phone and opened the airline's booking app. The record for my flight was gone. No boarding pass, no history, nothing. As if I'd never been on flight 602. But then, a notification blinked across my screen. One last system alert. Check and confirm for flight 602, passenger Rose Carter, Seat B. Status, boarding. I stared at it until it disappeared. Later, when I got home and unpacked my things, I found something at the bottom of my carry-on. A torn piece of fabric, gray polyester, stitched with a faint number, 32B, and that faint lavender scent still clung to it. I didn't sleep for 3 nights after landing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the woman in seat 32B. My own reflection, pale and empty, stares back. The lavender smell lingered on my clothes, my suitcase, even my hair. It was faint, but constant, like she was reminding me she hadn't left. By the 4th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, so I started digging. Flight 602 had flown that same Tokyo to Los Angeles route for years. The aircraft model was an older Boeing 777, retired just a few months ago. But when I searched the registration number from my boarding pass photo, the results didn't make sense. The plane I'd boarded, tail number N903AV, had been lost over the Pacific Ocean in 2014. No survivors. I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe the number had been reused. Maybe some aviation blog had it wrong. But every record said the same thing. Flight 602 disappeared 10 years ago. It never made it to Los Angeles. And yet, I had. I called the airline, pretending to be writing a report for an aviation website. The representative on the line hesitated when I gave her the flight number. She placed me on hold for a long time, too long, before coming back with a tight, careful tone. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no record of a flight 602 operating on October 18. "But I was on that flight," I said. "I have the ticket, the photos, the line went dead. That night, I pulled out the old boarding pass I'd found in the seat pocket, the one from 2014. I compared it with mine. Same name, same seat, same flight, same date. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. Something inside me cracked then. I needed proof, something physical, something real. I drove to the airport and parked near the maintenance hangars, where they store old aircraft for repairs. Through the fence, under the floodlights, I saw it, a faded white fuselage with a peeling logo and a familiar number near the tail, N903AV. I froze. My skin went cold. The aircraft was gutted, windows dark, dust coating its sides. It looked like it had been sitting there for years. But as I stared, I thought I saw movement inside, just a flicker. A shape. Someone is sitting near the back, by the window. Seat 32B. I pressed closer to the fence, my pulse hammering. That's when I smelled it again. Lavender. The wind carried it straight to me, heavy and sweet. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. A new message. No number, no contact name, just text. You're in the wrong seat again. The screen flickered and went dark. I left the airport shaking, barely able to breathe. I don't remember driving home. All I know is that I woke up on my couch hours later, the TV still on, and my phone lying face down beside me. When I picked it up, there was a photo in my gallery I didn't take, an image from inside the plane. It showed my seat, empty. But in the seat next to it sat I, head tilted, eyes closed, wearing the same clothes I had on that day. The timestamp on the photo read, the 12th of March 2014. Now, I don't know which version of me came home, the one who landed or the one who never did. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up to that faint sound, the click of a seatbelt beside me, the rustle of fabric, and the soft, unmistakable scent of lavender drifting through the dark. And every time I do, I whisper to the air, hoping she hears me. I'm sorry, the seat is yours. But she never answers. Only the quiet hum of something unseen, still waiting for boarding to begin again.